think we're going to have some people that didn't do the steps, but I emailed them. You know what I mean?
Hello.
I need a book. Let me get the microphone turned on. You're starting to say hi, right?
Yes, welcome. For those of you who are joining for the first time, your microphones are muted, but there's a little questions box, and you can type comments, questions, anything, and we can type back to you or address it during the class.
Let them know we're doing a few minutes for more people to join in.
Yeah, we'll wait like 5 more minutes to let people join.
I think this is going to work. I'm rigging my microphone. Can nobody hear me right now?
I can hear you.
Oh, does this one still work?
Yes.
Is that what they're hearing me through? We're just checking the sound here. Microphone. Yeah, okay.
Kathleen says hi, Sabina.
Hi, Kathleen.
We can see you. You're tiny in the background. And Rick.
Hello.
I don't know if this is going to help or hurt the cause with the microphone. We're going to find out. Ugh. Of course, it helps. Come on. This is the first part of class. It's watching you mess with them. Okay. I think if we run this, I'm still plugged in, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, that doesn't help. Well, that helps get it out of the way some, doesn't it? If it'll stay there.
There are a couple of you that I don't see on the paid list. So I'm going to send you a message. Maybe you just didn't see that there's a couple steps.
And I know a few people just signed up this morning.
Yeah,
So if you paid and you're getting a message, don't worry about it. We can clear it up later too. And I know we made it extra confusing this time by having like 3 different classes in a row. So we're slowly, there's just a few people that like I think paid for one but meant for a different one. So don't even worry about it right now. Just watch today and we can help sort that out. And then welcome, we have lots of new names, which we're super excited about. The other thing is we're always like investigating everybody's PayPal because lots of people's emails that they're using to join the class aren't remotely related to the name or email in your PayPal. And 9 times out of 10, that's what's going on. If you get a note or something, it might just be that like, we've got your name on our end, but PayPal has maybe your husband or an old email address or something. So then we just, once we link the 2 together, we're good to go. And we're going to wait about 2 more minutes to get the numbers up just a little bit higher, and then we're ready to rock and roll. Actually, we've nearly got everybody that we're expecting for today, because I know a couple ladies in faraway time zones are just going to watch the recording. We'll see if this works, if I don't end up accidentally unplugging the microphone or not. I'm always about to cut the cord with a rotary cutter or scissors too, so that's what we're trying to. Actually, I'm going to grab a rotary cutter and then we'll be ready to go. Everything looks good on your end? Pretty much. I know there's 3 ladies that aren't watching live, so that would mean we're only missing 1 person. So we'll just start here. Actually, I'm going to iron this piece of coatille quick. you see, is there a buttonhole spacer over there? In my pile? No, I didn't grab that. Thank you. Seconds away from starting. I just need to sharpen my pencils. I'm a bad teacher. I don't have my pencil sharpened. Let's see. Yeah, Tutu. Look, I already messed up my cord here. Yeah. All right. I think I'm ready. Rachel, are you ready?
Yeah.
You can hear me?
Yeah.
It's Tutu time. Almost. If I can make my clip work here. So the exciting thing is
It's like you're in like a harness.
I know. Oh, you can see the elastic hanging from the ceiling. My goal today is not to cut the cord for the microphone, which I have come very, very close to doing more than once. But I can't make it clip to my shirt. I need a pin. Pin, I got one. Actually, would you grab me a dish of pins too? Okay, we're ready to rock and roll. I'll just like safety pin this into my shirt. There, good to go. Welcome everybody to our second time we're doing the Classical Tutu webinar. And I'm gonna do a few different things this time than we did the last class, because everybody who's joined this class, we will also send you the 6 hours of recordings from the last time. So when it's all said and done, you'll have 12 hours of tutu making, because different questions will come up this time, and there were probably different questions last time. And with our basque, we're going to start with the panty and the basque today, and tomorrow will be more about like different ways to ruffle and connect stuff. And then the last day will be like doing some different tacking and steaming approaches. And a good amount of the folks that are taking today actually took patterning with us in the past. So we're going to do our regular 3-piece basque drafting, and then drafting with no seams in the basque. But then since more than half of you have done patterning with us, I'm going to make a really quick woman's body block out of the Costume Technician's Handbook and show you how we make our basques that we call it Hollywood cut, where it goes above the waist. And Pattern Club folks, we just sent out your April patterns, have a Hollywood cut style basque in it, which is more for like a romantic tutu because it's shorter. But if you want to join that to a panty, you can add a little bit of height on your panty or add a little bit of length to the bottom of that sizing sheet, and you'll have a really similar basque. But since we're all about drafting stuff too, I want to show you guys how we do that. So everybody's able to send Rachel questions during the webinar, and some stuff she already knows that we're probably going to answer it anyways, and often we'll get like double questions. So if you send it and I don't like stop and address it immediately, it probably means that it's on our list of stuff we're going to talk about. And the other thing is, everybody has different connections, and we watch the connection through our internet to see the quality we're getting in Chicago. So if you've got fuzzies or something drops out, hopefully when the recording saves and resends, it will be clearer. And the other thing is, if anybody has audio trouble, you can let Rachel know, but we're also listening to the audio through our internet. So if it doesn't drop out on our end, I will keep going, but we'll try to help problem solve as we go. So did I forget anything in the high welcome? We're so thrilled you're here. So, and I hope everybody saw the Facebook Live we did this morning. Our friend Diego in South America makes hundreds of tutus a week in his shop down there. And I was fascinated by their rolled pleats. And he just sent us the information on how he does that. And he said we could share. So how cool is that? Let's look at this tutu first, which is super, super decorated. And we'll probably later in the summer redo our top plate and decorating webinar. But if anybody wants our top plate or decoration webinar, we do have that for sale. And you can just message us or email us and let us know if you're interested in that. But we're gonna start by making a 3-piece basque, which looks more like this. So this is just cotilles and some cheap matte satin. Hooks and bars, and we put a little bit of elastic on the top of this, and we pipe the bottom. Because one thing that we do is the method that we prefer is we put the basque on later, because if we have the dancer in a fitting, we like to adjust the basque seams, make sure the back is all nice and lined up before we join it to the tutu. Because once it's joined to the tutu, if you have some adjustments to make, it's a little more difficult. And even when you have your tutu and basque separate, if your netting's a little bit big, it's easier to kind of shrink it in a little bit, like either with some gathering stitch or some strategic little tucks, then join it to the basque. And that's just the way I learned and have kept with, but you can certainly join your basque at the beginning and then put all the net on. So this is our 3-piece basque, which has side seams, and it's similar to a 1-piece basque. But what I find with the 1-piece basque is the back ends up really wavy and wrinkled on a girl. So if you think about this as being one continuous piece and your front is on the fold, what happens as you work your way towards the back, the center back seam gets on some weird grain line, and then you start to get weird waves and wrinkles because the center back of your basque will stretch out. So we like to have a side seam, and we put the odd bias happening at the side of the basque, which helps it stretch out nice over her hips, and it also keeps the center back straight on the straight of grain so that when it hooks up, it doesn't get as wavy with wear. Because you can make something that has a weird grain line going on and it fits great the first day or two, but then as they wear it, stuff stretches out and starts to get kind of wavy. And the other thing that we do with our basques, if I lay this one down, you can see that the back of my basque is actually longer than the front. And we do that because it helps keep the tutu laying parallel to the floor. Because if you think about like a good pair of pants, the waistband in the back should come up to make a little bit of room for your butt. So we just do the reverse, and in our basque, we make the back of it dip down just a little bit, which helps keep the netting parallel instead of the girl standing flat to the floor and the back tipping up just a little bit. So we're trying to keep the tutu on the same plane as the surface that they're dancing on. So today we're going to draft a basque, talk about basques, and we're also going to cut out, make a few alterations to a panty and work on a panty. So that's our goal for today. So I think, let me get this out of the way, and we'll just start with panty stuff. Just going to throw that over there. We've been sending out the panty requests for everybody. And if you haven't got yours yet today because you just signed up or haven't sent it, don't worry about it. You don't need it for today. But with this class, everybody gets to choose 2 sizes of our panty pattern. And also, some of you I already know have it in every size. So you can elect to just pick any other pattern from our store in place of your 2 panty patterns. So let's look there's like so much information on this panty. Yeah, zoom in on the panty a little bit. That's great. So this one is just loaded with stuff. And it's got more on here than you probably need. But it's got placement lines for like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 layers of netting. You can use these placement lines, or we're going to also show you how we place a lot of lines. We just use a buttonhole gauge. We call it a Lady of Spain. And it also has information on here to put an elastic in it. And we'll do this casing if we think the tutu needs to get used for years and years and years. And what it is it's going to be a channel sandwiched between the 2 layers of mesh that we're using for our panty with an elastic put in it, and we just leave a little hole so that over time, as this is worn by other girls and it stretches out, if the panty isn't fitting well against their body, that's one thing that will cause the netting to drip in a weird way. So if you've got this casing in the middle of your panty, after a few years, you can just pull that elastic tighter, or you don't even have to start with the elastic in there. But if you leave this casing, it gives you somewhere to add an elastic to help bring the panty back to her body. Older tutus were made a lot with bobinette or just netting for the panty. But in these modern times, we're using different layers of stretch mesh. We use kind of a medium weight stretch mesh and a lightweight stretch mesh to create our panty. But again, this casing, don't put it in if the style of the tutu is droopy already, if you have kind of a bell or an English tutu. And don't put it in if you think it's going to be worn 1 time or twice for a competition. But it is handy if you think multiple girls have got to wear it over the years. So let's look at the pattern. The other thing that we do with our stretch mesh is we put a little bit of twill tape in the side, and actually what we do now is we put a V of twill tape, like an upside down V, and that helps keep the panty from stretching vertically over time. So we want room for her butt and stuff, but we also sometimes don't want it to grow in certain places. So we're going to show you how we put a little piece of tape in there to keep the panty from elongating with wear. Rick, would you see if there's any sew shear anywhere, or like that nylon net, or just a piece of organza? I'm going to show you another thing that we would do often at the Joffrey in the top of the panty. So let's just cut out the panty first. Let me get this piece of paper out of the way. If there's none, just even a piece of, like, cut me a square of that English net or something. Okay. It doesn't even matter what color it is. So the great thing with the panties is they're very adjustable. And this is actually a 31-inch high hip that we just split. We put a split in this and made it a 32. So if you get like every other size, you can make the size above or below it fairly easily. And the other thing is everybody sews a little bit different. Some people sew kind of heavy-handed. And as they're sewing all their layers on, the panty gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So if you kind of are in tune to how you sew, you can adjust the panty a little bit. So we want this to fit a 31-inch waist. And it was actually a 31, or not waist, high hip. It was a 31-inch high hip, but we split it and we added a 1/2 inch here so that we could use it for a 32 instead of just printing out a 32. We just chopped up what was in the box. So just easily you can enlarge a panty by splitting it and opening it. And if you needed to add more than an inch, so if I add a 1/2 inch, yeah, that's good. If I add a 1/2 inch, that's giving me an inch more all the way around because we only have half a pattern. If you need to split it more than a 1/2 inch, you can just split it in a second place and open up 2 places a little tiny bit. Reversely, you can split it and shrink it. And usually those splits are kind of over the fuller part of their butt. So this was a 31 that we changed to a 32. So I'm going to just take away a 1/2 of an inch and tape that together. And we've got on our on the HalseyOnstage.com, there's a page called Pattern Info. There's 3 sheets on that page about completely about changing the size of your panty. So instead of me going through all of that, if you just look at the Halsey Onstage Pattern Info page, you can see that. There's also information about splitting a panty across to change the girth if you need a little bit more girth. And the other thing that we do every now and then, the front crotch of our panty is cut like the most modest version you would ever need. So like if I draw in here, the front of our panty is a little bit more like that. There's a little more paper in there. We always go in and slim out here about 3/8 of an inch, but we ended up leaving it with that more modest cut because in the early days of this panty, a lot of people were complaining that this was a little too narrow for every age of girl and dance scenario kind of has a different vibe. So we've got it on the pattern. It's cut a little bit wider, but you can slim it in. And actually, this is the original of this pattern. If I lay the 2 down, I don't know if it shows, but we've narrowed it in a little bit. Just in like the narrowest part can go in a little tiny bit. But that info is in a handout on the pattern info page. So now that I've got this, the size we want, let's look at the 2 different meshes we're going to use. There's a really heavy stretch mesh out there. And, obviously I wish you were all here with me and could pull on this. There's a mesh, we call it, it's more like a girdle mesh, like an old time girdle. It's like really tough. And the feel of it is a little bit gritty. This one works if you pair it with the other layer of a thin mesh, because we're using 2 layers to create our panty instead of using 1 layer and folding up a channel or putting in a piece of bias tape. So kind of use your discretion. Like the stiffest one that we're able to source, we get it from Spandex House, is a little bit too stiff. But if you can get samples from whoever your supplier is, there's a heavy version that's just a little bit softer and feels a little bit better. We're going to combine that with a layer of the really fine stretch mesh, the one that's more sheer. So we don't want to use 2 layers of the heavy stuff. It will be uncomfortable down there for the lady. But if you combine a medium and a thin or a heavy and a thin, it just feels a little bit better. So we're going to cut this out. And sometimes we'll do 2 layers of the thin is actually how I started making these, with 2 layers of thin is what I was taught. But then I kind of decided I liked the in-between weight by combining a medium and a heavier. And if you're using 2 layers of the same fabric, you want to cut one panty with the most stretch going across, then cut the other panty with the most stretch going up and down. And we call that balancing the stretch. You're using the 2 fabrics, the 2 same fabric, each direction to kind of meet in the middle with the stretch. But since we're going to use a heavier weight, we want to cut our heavier weight panty with the most stretch going around the body. And when you have a heavier weight fabric and a lightweight fabric, we say that the responsibility is on the heavier fabric, so it doesn't matter which direction we cut the lightweight fabric because the heavier one will overrule it. So let's cut out our panty. And we've always just got shards of fabric that we're trying to use up. So I'm going to turn this, and my most stretch is going from selvage to selvage. So I'm going to just fold this along my straight grain. You never know when you need one of those little edges, but they sure are ugly and frustrating, right? So I'm going to just cut this on the fold with the center front being on the fold. I do know some folks that I've learned from at different times will cut the panty with a center front seam to kind of keep the stretch even more balanced across the body. And I would say it's not super necessary unless you think you've got a really tricky fit and you're able to fit the panty on the girl before you cover it with tulle or netting. You know, once you've covered this with tulle and net, there's really no reason to fit the panty anymore. But some makers will fit it before anything is sewn onto it. I gotta get my weight. Ugh. And this has got seam allowance in it, so I'm gonna just follow right along. And I'm not so concerned about putting the lines and stuff on until the panty is made. Because what we're gonna be showing is that we double some layers. Rather than sewing every single layer on, we save a little bit of hassle by either ruffling some layers together, or you can also ruffle the layers separate, zigzag them together quick, and then put them on. So we're gonna probably end up with like 6 or 7 lines on our panty, but 10 or 11 layers of netting. I'm guessing is what we're gonna end up with. So now that I've cut my heavy mesh, I can be done with that. And now I'm gonna cut my lightweight mesh. And since we have the heavy mesh, it doesn't really matter which direction we cut the lightweight one out of, because the heavy one is going to override the lightweight one. And I actually like to open my lightweight one. So I've got both of them, I have the most stretch going around. But if I was using 2 layers of this lighter weight, I would cut one each direction. So the other thing that's going to save you a little bit of time and headache is if I cut both of them from my pattern, it's not going to line up so great because I'm human, right? And I'm not going to cut it exactly the same each time. So I like to just lay my first cut right onto my second fabric. And then I'm also, the first thing we're going to sew is the leg holes. So I'm always thinking about, does my pinning reflect what I'm going to sew? Thank you, Sabrina. I'm throwing pens and pencils at Sabina. They're making clown costumes. How fun is that? It sounds fun. These clown costumes have backstory. So I'm pinning so that I'm able to just serge my leg holes when it's time. I'm not super duper concerned about anything else yet. Then I don't have to lay a pattern down a second time, and then by pinning it now, I don't have to line something else up later on. So we'll see how terrible my rotary cutter blade is. This will be the next question that comes up. Somebody will say, where is your rotary mat from? These are from a place called signsdirect.com, and it's a 4x8 foot healable mat, but they do wear out if you cut in the same spot over and over, just like the green mats. And Rachel's new one came with a printed grid, so I guess you can order a grid to go underneath the mat. Watch your fingers. I think my blade's terrible. This will be embarrassing. Oh, not too bad. Actually, it's all the chunks cut out of my table. Self-healing, kind of. It's like it paid for a little therapy, but not all of it, so it'll only heal a little. So there's that. Then the other thing we're going to do at this point is we're going to reinforce the center back. So if we flip our panty this way, we've got the front here, we've got our 2 backs. We're going to reinforce right now where the hook and bar are going to go on the back of our panty to help close the back up instead of trying to feed it in later. So actually we put the hook and bar on early in the process, and we also will feed the elastic into the leg holes early on instead of trying to deal with it once all the net is on. So I'm just cutting a strip that's like 1.5 inches to 2 inches wide. And then we want to make that strip about like 6 or 7 inches long. And we try to always think about like what all can we do while we're either cutting or sewing instead of going back and forth a lot. So this little piece of mine is eventually going to go, we're going to stitch the leg holes, we're going to serge the leg holes together first. Then it's going to flip over. The whole panty is going to flip over like this. And we want this little piece to end up in between the layers. So if you want right away, you can pin it to just the one of your layers. So I opened that up and I'm going to pin it just to one of these layers. And then later on, when we flip it over, we're going to actually stitch around this and stitch our 1-inch seam allowance down the middle. So the center, back, and top of this panty pattern has about a 1-inch seam allowance. The crotch is like 3/4 to an inch. And that's another place where you can adjust stuff. Like you can adjust your girth a little bit in the crotch. Or if you've got a really long girl, you can add just a little bit to the top of the panty to make a little more girth. And actually, that makes me think of a little drawing I should do real quick for you. So this strip doesn't have to go all the way down. It could even be a little bit shorter. It's just we're thinking about like how far up are we going to sew the back crotch, and that we want some reinforcement for, we're going to put a hook and bar in there. So we want that to be nice and tight. But let me draw a little thing. So when you are making your, oh, we've got one person that can't get in. Let's see. Will you message, will you ask Melinda for her email and tell her you're sending the link? She is? Mm-hmm. Oh, hi, Melinda. You're good. So you'll get whatever you missed in the recording. All right. Let me draw this little picture. So you've got a basque, right? So when you're figuring out the girth of your panty, you've got a basque that's going to join to a panty. Your half girth is from your waist in front of the girl, down to the crotch, back up the back, up the back. So you want to figure out how tall is your basque. And we usually do them like 3.5 inches tall-ish, a little shorter for shorter girls, a little taller for tall girls. And it's kind of the design preference of you, how long you want that, and where do you want the net to come out of the girl's hip. But when you're measuring your panty, figuring out your panty girth, remember that you need to take the 3.5 in the front, 3.5, because that's how much basque we're doing today. We've got 4 inches in the back, that's 7.5. You take that away from the half girth. So if this girl's half girth was 23, we would take 7.5 from 23. This is how bad I am at math. 23 minus 7.5. So our panty, 23 minus 7.5, would need to be 15.5 inches left in girth. So on your panty, remember, don't measure your seam allowances when you're figuring out your girth, because they don't fall into the girth equation. Take away your seam allowances, measure your front, measure your back, to see then if once the panty is joined to the basque, if your girth is good to go. That's the quote of the day. Is your girth good to go, everybody? I hope so. Okay, so we're kind of got our panty almost set up for sewing, but we're going to set up a little bit more for sewing. The other thing I wanted to show you that we would do at the Joffrey, we had less of a size range between the girls there. And another thing that was kind of like a combination of a couple different methods is, this is just a piece of organza, but there's a stuff called sew shear, which is like a tricot interfacing that comes iron on or not iron on. You could do this with a piece of netting, but what we would do at the Joffrey with sew shear or organza, this is just a piece of organza, is on one layer of our panty, we would make kind of like a 2 or 3 inch yoke that followed the same shape of the panty, and we would zigzag an extra piece of fabric on there. So just the top 2 or 3 inches of the panty, we would put an extra layer so that when it's finished, this layer ends up in between the layers of your panty, and that just makes sure that the top few rows of netting that you sew on don't make the panty grow, and that it will fit the basque really nice. So, and I think we did it there too, because we had some really rough, tough sewers. So by adding this little bit in there, they weren't able to stretch the panty out as they sewed it, and the netting would just totally match. Did that kind of make sense to you? Trying to explain that again? I think rewatch it, listen to this later on. But so we're just adding a little piece of shaped fabric that was thin. That's why sew sheer or organza to the top to keep your panty from growing, because nobody wants saggy panties. Let's set the panty aside and come back to it. And let's draft a really basic basque first, and then we're going to do some like more gourmet basque stuff. And we're doing good on time. So my girl,
I think
yeah,
the basic tutu class,
yeah,
you should tell them like why you do a basque and a panty and like what they.
oh yeah, that's great. That's great. Rachel said I should like explain those
What
different
tutu's
things a
made
little
of.
bit better. Yeah, let me grab, can you grab the tutu down there? That's great, Rach. I've made one of these, so I know what's going on. That's why you have to have a good sidekick, you know. So, right, the top part of this, like we started out with, this is just the basque, which is the waistband, or some people call it a yoke. Actually, some makers in Europe call it the yoke in the trunk or yoke in the brief. So we've got a basque or a yoke. Knickers, yes, Sabina, it's knickers too. That's more English too, right? Knickers, the knicker. And you can make a basque that's one piece, which is what we're going to start with. But we often cut our basques, we call it Hollywood style, so that there's 1.5 inches, so that there's room of fashion fabric up higher in the bodice, so that as her bodice moves up and down, you don't see their skin. If you're not cutting a long line or a Russian bodice, where the bottom of the bodice joins all the way up to her chest and all the way down to the skirt. So that's the basque. And we're starting with a basic one. And then in here, this is a very old tutu, which needs some rehab. Then we've got our trunk in here, and this is our 2 layers of thin stretch mesh. This was back when I was doing it all with just thin. And actually, this sucker has been worn a ton of times, and it surprisingly hasn't died yet. The nylon in there's still good. And then we will be drafting, we've already got our panty pattern. We will be applying rows onto the panty to sew the different layers of the tutu. And actually, if I look in this panty, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've got 6 lines stitched in the panty, 6 lines, but we actually have 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 layers of net and 1 layer of tulle. So they're doubled up. We're ruffling or gathering more than one section of tutu at a time, so that there's less wrestling the panty on the sewing machine. And doubling them, I think it helps with speed, and it also helps with not stretching the panty out so much, because you're not sewing so much across the panty. That got it? That's good? Okay. On to our basque or our basque or our yoke. Let me get my piece of pattern paper back. So we're going to start off with just a very few measurements that we need to do the basic basque. We need their waist and their high hip. Where does the netting come out of the dancer? And I'll usually, when we measure the girls, if I'm taking the measurements, we tie a string around their waist, and then I have the girls like lift their leg up. Yeah, show my beautiful body here. I'll tie a string around their waist. Mine is really super high. I would have a long basque. And then I kind of just like see where their leg moves out from their, like where does their leg hinge? Your basque can go a smidge past that, but not much, right? You don't want it to go, if you want a really long look with low netting, you don't want to go much past that break point. And the other thing is you can just kind of like feel around on the girls. This looks like I'm punching a beanbag. You can kind of feel around for like where the high part of their hip bone is. So that's what we're using right now is their waist and their high hip. Oh, I'll just remove my mic to here. Is that better?
Yeah.
Mic check. Okay, so let's start with what we're doing. And then like the length of the basque, right? Different people have a different preference, and you'll find that like sometimes you just have to make what your artistic director wants, and it's just them remembering what they wore in their glory days on stage. I for like an average height girl start with like 3.5 in the front. If she's taller, 4 inches. If she's a little under average height, like if she's like a little under 5'6", 5'5", 5'4", maybe do 3 inches. And then children are usually around like 2 to 2.5 inches. So you can also too just make up a couple different ones, put them on some bodies, and then you decide what you think looks best. You know, because it's your decision making too, right? So I have her waist, her high hip, and I want her basque height. We're going to say BH, go Buttonhole Cavaliers. So my center front is going to be 3.5 inches. The first thing we're going to do is divide all those numbers in half. So so I'm going to write my original waist, high hip, and my basque height right onto my pattern paper. And we're going to do some math. Half of 25 is 12.5. I need to know that number. Half of 31 is 15.5. And my basque height is going to be 3.5 inches. And like I said at the very beginning, we're going to dip the bottom back of the basque down to keep the tutu a little more flat to the floor. So once you've done that, divide your waist and high hip in half, then you just need to know the difference between the two. And it's math I can do. The difference between 12.5 and 15.5 is 3 inches. So we're going to start with a block or a rectangle to create this 3-piece basque. So my rectangle, and I've got a weird quilting ruler that has an extra 1/2 inch. Watch yourself there. I'm going to start with a rectangle that's half of my high hip plus an inch. And that inch is going to give a seam allowance inside the basque. So we're going to draft a pattern that has seam allowance. So rather than making a rectangle that's half of our high hip, cutting and pasting a 1/2 inch seam allowance on later, we're going to put the seam allowance in right now. So instead of my 15.5 inch high hip, I'm going to make it 16.5. So the length of my rectangle, we're going to start with 16.5. And my basque height in the center front is 3.5. So we're going to also go down 3.5. And then we're just going to make that a whole rectangle. So half of our high hip plus an inch, and then the height of your first rectangle is just your basque height. Okay, so the front is going to be over here, and it's going to be on the fold, and our center back is going to be over here on the left. Then the next thing we want to figure out, I can move too. The next thing we need to sort out is where's the side seam going to be? And I like to put the side seam a little bit towards the back. Oh, am I rubbing the mic? It sounds like a snake sliding on there. I like to put the side seam a little bit more towards the back because if anything, you want that seam to be at the girl's side or a smidge back. Otherwise, visually, it looks like they're leaning forward. So we're just going to fold it in half. And I always say this is like your tentative side seam. So I found the middle of that box, but then I want to go a 1/4 of an inch more towards the back. So I'm going from the middle of my box a 1/4 of an inch more, and that's going to be my side seam. And then that extra inch we added in, that's seam allowance. So my stitching line is actually a 1/2 inch on either side of the side seam. So now we have a front and a back, and the front is just a smidge longer than the back to keep the seam looking attractive on a human body. From there, we're going to divide the front into thirds, and we're going to divide the back into fourths. So if you're able, you can just keep folding your paper, because I'm much better than figuring out the math of that. So I'm just folding my front kind of into thirds as good as I can here. It's not perfect, but neither am I. So now I've got thirds in my front. And then I'm going to divide my back into fourths. And if you don't have such a huge piece of paper, this is a little bit easier. Another thing that you can do, and is easy and also handy for placing buttons and stuff, you can just take a little tiny strip of paper, rip it so that it's the length of what you're doing, and you can fold that into thirds and then make one for the back and fold that into fourths. Because for me, that's easier than figuring out, like, you know, what 2 6/8 is. It's just easier for me to do that. So that's a good little trick. So we've got our front divided into thirds and our back divided into fourths. And this is where we're going to reduce the waist so that it fits her high hip and her waist. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Now, earlier I said too, we're going to drop the back of the boss. We're going to make the center back seam a little bit longer to help keep stuff flat to the floor. So right now on like my back section, I'm going to come down a 1/2 inch longer, a 1/2 inch lower than my original line. So here's where we're dropping the back. We've dropped the back a little bit. And then I'm going to take a curved ruler and blend that up to my new stitching line, my side back, or my side of the back. And you don't want it to be like a quick hump down. You want like a nice gradual line so that it blends up to the side and that the longest part is at the center back. So now we have our front, we have our back. Now we're going to put in the darts to shrink the waist. So earlier we found the difference between half of the waist and half of the high hip is 3 inches. And I've got these 5 lines, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are the 5 places where we are going to reduce the waist. So it was from splitting the front into thirds and the back into fourths. So since I'm terrible at math, I'm going to take 5 divided by the 3 inches, and I get 1 6/10 inch. So you can use an architect's ruler, not an engineer's ruler. Oh, I hope that's what it is. Is this? Oh no, I lied. Use an engineer's ruler, not an architect's ruler. I have both, so I don't even know which one is which. And you'll see that this has an inch divided into tens. So instead of a standard inch, which is in eighths, this is a 1 inch divided into tens. So it's easier for me to do an inch and 6/10 with this ruler. So that would be 5, 6, 7, 8/10, right? Oh, except I hope somebody caught that. I did 5 divided by 3. I need to divide 3 by 5. I'm human too, Rachel. I'm human too.
Are you?
Yeah, that was a good mistake to make. Ha ha! So it's not an inch and 6/10, it's 6/10. I knew that was wrong when I was looking at it. So let's reverse so everybody can enjoy that I also make mistakes. We have our high hip and our waist. We divided them by half, and we found the difference is 3 inches. Then we made 5 vertical lines across our boss to spread the 3 inches over. So I needed to take 3 inches divided by 5 places, not the opposite, which gives us 6/10 inch, which is what makes this ruler so easy because it's divided. I can use the tens and find 6/10 much easier. So I'm going to put 3/10 on each side of that line. 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. So we're essentially making 5 darts. Or like 6/10 is pretty much 5/8 of an inch. That also works. But it's easier to divide it this way. So now we're going to run our darts from our bottommost line just up to the waist, because we're shrinking the waist till it hits the body. And the reason why we've got 3 darts in the back instead of even darts the whole way across is most people, even a skinny ballerina, have more volume on the back of their body than the front of their body. So we want the more space to go out over her butt than we do in the front. We want more butt in the back and less butt in the front. But there are people with front butts, and you got to watch for that too. Now, we're going to put our seam allowance on this before we cut it out. I like to have a 1/2 inch at the top, but this is stitcher's choice. You're not married to these seam allowances. For some reason, I like 3/4 at the bottom, so that there's like not tons of bulk in there, but like should you want to lower the panty on the basque a little bit, you have a little room. And then I like 2 inches at the center back. And remember, we've already got our 1/2 inch at the sides. So now we're going to free this from the paper. And then we're going to slice the front from the back, and then we are going to put in the darts. Now, so I'm going to just cut the front from the back. Well, actually, I'm going to leave it for just a second so we can show you a couple different things. I cut the dart up, but then to get it to fold over nice, you have to put a little slit below the dart, but you don't have to like completely cut the paper off. I'll lose my tape. So now we're going to tape that together and just work our way across. So I'm going to release the bottom, split the top, fold that over. There we go. Release the bottoms, split the top. And growing dancers, when the girls are youngins, sometimes they hardly have a difference between their waist and high hip. So say your difference is 1 inch, just put 1 dart in the front and 1 dart in the back, because they're little tubes. But the more difference you have, the more darts you want. So now we've got our center front on the right and our center back on the left. You can just put this right on the fold of your twill or your cotillion flat lining or whatever you're using, and cut this out on the fold, and you've got a 1-piece basque totally ready to go to use as a rehearsal one, or to flatline fashion on top of, to add fashion to in your set. But like I said earlier, we like to have a side seam. So we're going to free this up our side. Then we end up with the front on the straight of grain and the back on the straight of grain, and the bias is happening at the side, which is going to help it curve over her hips. So that's what's kind of going on with this. Does anybody have questions about what we've done so far? Now is a good time, because I'm going to really quick draft a girl's body block, because this is going to be helpful for a good amount of the folks that are in this class. No question? So let's look at that one though again quick with this one. So we're going to be doing a high cut basque to a specific person's measurement, but this is a 3-piece basque, pretty much ready to go. The steps are very similar, and you'll get the instructions for sewing this with the link from the last time we taught this class. So this fits in right there. Our back fits in right there. We've got our extra 2 inches to make the lap for the closure, and bias at the sides. That's what's going on with that. So now, anybody who's interested, oh, we just got a Wix message from Ann Hold Ward, who's a famous Broadway designer. we're going to want to look at that. Now that I'm an award winner, you guys, it's upped my life. Rachel's going to check this message as soon as I write down this girl's measurements. So anybody who's interested in patterning, it applies to tons and tons and tons of stuff. But I'm going to really quick do a body block. And this thing that I'm going to go through really fast isn't the focus of our class, but it applies to a bunch of people that have taken patterning. So I want to show them how we use it. Let's see, my back neck to waist is 15. I want to show you how we use the patterning for body blocks. Do you have the Wix app?
Yeah.
Okay, Rachel's checking our message. It starts with, this is Ann Holdboard, a girlfriend of mine. So if anybody's like really interested in what I'm doing right now, it's from the Costume Technician's Handbook. And we also have like 12 hours of this stuff available if anybody wants to check with us about possibly buying that. So I'm going to really quick make a body block. And if you're like not super into this, now it's a good time to go to the bathroom. But I'm not like getting super detailed into this. So I'm going to start with half my chest. I'm going to start with half my waist. I'm going to start with my back, neck to waist. And this body block is going to have a 1-inch bust dart, which doesn't really apply right now. And it's going to have a 3/4, it's actually going to have a 1-inch waist dart too. So I'm going to make 2 boxes. What did she say? What does it say? Read it, read it. Oh.
But basically, she's also from Montana.
Oh.
Understands the work ethic.
Right? That was.
You don't forget the back of the tractor.
No. Part of my acceptance speech last week was about South Dakota work ethic. And I think, you know, that's an important thing. Half of my waist is 12 and a half, 6 1/4, 7 1/4. So what I'm making is like the patterning basic that like all flat patterns start from. I'm just making the, so this is really similar too to what we had just done with making the Bosque. Like that Bosque dart stuff all originates from what I'm doing right here, which is called making a body block. So I'm making the front and back of a girl's body. And again, like I said, this is going to be completely foreign to a few of you, but a bunch of you have either played with patterns with me in person or have done the hours and hours of me talking about patterns live. So I'm making a front and a back. Now, I'm not going to be super particular about drawing in the back neck or the front neck, but in the book, in the body block section, you draw in a front shoulder, you draw in a back shoulder, you divide stuff in half, you draw in a back neck, you draw in a back shoulder, you draw in a back armhole. But to make this Hollywood cut Bosque, I'm not even concerned with her bust dart that would eventually go in here. I'm concerned with the distance between her nipples, and our girl is 6 1/2 distance between her nipples. So I'm going 3 1/4 is where I'm going to place a dart. And then her waist, so we're going to put a 1-inch dart in the front and back of this. Her waist, we're going to move the side seam just like towards the back, just like we did with the Bosque. But we're making a tall Hollywood cut Bosque. So 1/4 of my 25-inch waist is 6 1/4. So I'm not counting the dart, but I'm going to go over 6 1/4 inches plus 1/4. That puts me at 7 1/4. So her side is like right here, straight up and down the side. But then my back, I have to scoot to the back 1/4. So I'm going to go 7 1/4, and I'm going to take away 1/4. And even in my armpits, really like right there. This looks like scribbles, but it will start to make sense. Then also in the back, I'm going to have a, so is good stuff, nice stuff?
Yeah, very nice.
Yeah, good. She didn't say she needed to hire us though or anything. Oh, darn it. Remind me to write her back. I wonder if she was there. I got to meet Bob Mackey. That was fun. He said, he leaned over to me and said, "You've got this, kid." So that was nice. And I also got to hang out with Greg Barnes, who's the designer for Aladdin on Broadway, and a bunch of other stuff. Okay, so, right, we have a scribbled body block here, but I only need the waist section, these darts. But for anybody that this is new for, it's really good to learn, because once you learn this stuff, you're not limited by having to purchase a single pattern. But if I zoom in here, this is what you end up with when you make a full female body block. I was only interested in the bottom part, so I kind of just half-assed the top to get the information that I need. But now kind of going back to the basque pattern we started with, I know that my front is going to be 3.5 inches, 3.5. And my back is going to be 3.5 inches, but it's going to drop down to 4 inches. So I'm going to drop my back down. So now we're starting to create a basque below the waist of this body block, below this female body block. That's all right. That's all right. You did. Then let me get a curved ruler. So now we want to bring these darts down into our basque section. So below the waist of this is our basque. The front dart is pretty much skinnier and longer. So I measure kind of the height of my front dart. And I don't have enough paper, but I'm going to just go into outer space. That's 8 inches long. So or some people call this a French dart. So I'm going to go down 8 inches, put a dot on my table. And from that 8 inches is where I'm going to slide up to my front waist dart. And you'll see I don't care about the part really that's beyond where my basque is going to be. So that makes the front flat to the body. Now the back, we need more curve. So I'm only going to go down to the bottom, to my high hip, to the bottom of my basque. And I'm going to complete that dart. So we've got more dartage going on in the back. And then before, just how we made the bottom of this fit the high hip on our 3-piece basque, we've got to make the bottom of this also hit our high hip. So our high hip is 31. So half of 31 is 15.5. Similar sounding to what we did earlier. And we're only dealing with the front and back, so I can divide that in half again. So 15.5 divided by 2 is 7 3/4. The FedEx man is here. I wonder what he's got. I hope it's presents. Who's it from? Is it for you? What is it? I love packages. Can you tell how distracted I was? Oh, it's just moleskin. So I've got 7 3/4 is what's going to be my hip in the front and my hip in the back. But just like we've been doing, we're going to move the side seam 1/4 inch to the back. And now I have this dart here. This doesn't count in my 7 3/4 because it's going to be sewn up. So I'm going to measure this side. So I'm measuring just the right side of my dart is 3 inches. And I'm going to go to 7 3/4 plus 1/4 because we're moving the seam towards the back. And then hopefully I've got enough here. I've got 6 3/4. Was that one? No, 7 3/4. Minus 1/4 of an inch. Oh, I have my pieces overlapping a little bit. I didn't leave enough of a gap. So this is going to create my back. And look, when I put that right angle in there, I almost don't even need this ruler. You'll see what happened here. It's good that I'm screwing up all kinds of stuff. I needed more gap here because right now I've got my front basque overlapping my back basque just a smidge. But I can take care of it because I know how to solve problems. Really, this is all just problem solving. And the reason we put a right angle in right there is we don't want to have like a bird shape going on. So if you take the patterning or read through some pattern drafting books, you'll see that there's right angles all over the place. So my front is going to be on the fold. This is my center front. This is going to be my side front, my side back, and my center back. Now, this is our waist. So I'm going to say that I want, this girl isn't super tall. I'm going to make this go about 1 3/4 inches. Actually, let's do 2 inches above her waist. So that's going to be the top edge of my basque. Now this one I'm not putting seam allowance on right now because I don't have room to put the seam allowance. So this has no seam allowance. But if we cut this out, you'll see that you can make infinite basques. And like I said, the one that the Pattern Club folks got, we originally used for our Tutu class. And we use that for a lot of romantic skirts because it's not long enough to be for what we like to do for classical tutus. But that doesn't mean that you can't just add to the bottom of that and have a whole set of these ready to go. So now let's free these from each other. So we've got a front on the fold. We've got a side front that I'm losing a little bit of my side back because it overlapped a little, but that's okay. I can fix it. A side back, and then a center back. And this is great for all sorts of stuff. Actually, Rick is making some skirts right now. Do you have one together with a basque on it, with your PC basque? Let's show them. Yeah. Is that, I'm going to show you what Rick's making. Yeah, oh, how cute is that? So Rick's making these darling clown skirts right now. They're just, good job, Rick.
Thank you.
They're just little circle skirts. One cool thing that we've done is we he's horsehaired the bottom to give it some body. And we've got the grain lines lined up so that they're holding each other up so that we don't have a droopy section of skirt. Then he's got his 3 ruffles. But up here, he made not a high cut basque, but he made a basque in sections too. And look how brilliantly he's matched the stripe going across the sections of his basque. So here it's a basque, but it's also just a yoke. He's making a fitted section of skirt and then finishing the top with some elastic because she'll have a top that goes over it. But what's cool is that that applies in more than one place. And I think he's also dropped his back a little bit longer to help it fit level on her butt. So cool. Thanks for showing us your clown skirt. Right, how quick I forgot what's going on. So this little piece that I chopped accidentally out of my side back, I'm going to just fix. I want to fix that right now. And we're going to cut this out of twill. So what's missing here is our grain lines. We've got a front on the fold, a side front, a side back, and a center back. The front, the grain line is going to go straight up with the fold. So our grain line in the front is just the fold. Our back grain line is going to be just right with the back. Then you've got decisions to make here now. We like to put either both the side front and side back on the bias to give some flex. But when we do that, we run an elastic across the waist, across the side, from the side front to the side back, to help keep it pinched in. That's if you put both on the bias, or even if you put one on the bias, which is what I'm going to do for today. So I'm going to put my side front on the straight of grain. So I'm taking my grain line from the waist. Then my side back, I'm going to put bias that comes from the back towards the front. So this is going to be my grain line for my side back. And that gives a little bit of flex around the waist for breathing. And also by putting it at least in the back, it gives a little more room for her butt. So if I was going to put bias in only one place, I would normally put it on the side back. And then we can put in a couple notches right now to help us line stuff up. So I'm putting 2 notches in the back, 1 notch in the front. I'm going to add just a 1/4 inch to the top of my pieces because we're going to bind it with bias, either fashion or just pre-made bias tape. I'm going to do 1/2 inch at my vertical seams. I'm going to do 2 inches at the back. And since this is being worn by one girl who I have good measurements for and it'll never be worn again, I'm going to just put a 1/2 inch at the bottom. This is going to be a Don Q Paquita kind of red and gold skirt in the end. Any questions about that? I'm going to cut out and make this one because the other video link that you're going to get has this one in it already. So you'll be getting like double the info on basques. No question? Okay. Let's see. So I've got a piece of cotillo here, and twill also works. Like if you're just starting, don't invest in cotillo, but know that like it's a good fabric for this kind of stuff. Another good fabric for this is satin-backed cotton, which we get from Whaley's in London. And you can also get the satin-backed cotton from Richard the Thread, from Lois Muerna at Richard the Thread. And it's what New York City Ballet and Barbara Matera, when Barbara Matera's shop was around, they use the satin-backed cotton a lot. But sturdy-wise, the cotillo is more affordable. The satin-backed cotton's about $40 a yard. The cotillo you can get from like 10 to 14, depending on the day and, you know, the price of fish in Spain. And it works just as great, but it doesn't have that pretty satin finish like satin-backed cotton does. And we had a piece of it, but we ration it out, you know, like it's the last piece on the planet. It's got to be a really special costume for that. But in the cotillo, let me show you just a few things. It might not show unless I hold a piece up. There's a herringbone weave that runs in the cotillo, and that weave is your straight grain. So we're often, on bodices and tutu stuff, we're often penciling the grain line in with the weave so that we know that we're right on the grain. It's more important for us to have it nice and square than it is to not have a line in a bodice or a skirt. So there's that. The other thing that if you've done the bodice class with me or any class where something is made, I'm always taking a piece of cotillo or any fabric and drawing a straight line on it. Once this stuff's cut out, you got to treat it like it's a little bit delicate for a bodice or a skirt or all kinds of sewing. So I'm going to just draw a curve on my cotillo, and I'm going to give myself 2 notches to line up. I'm going to line up A to A, because what totally happens with a lot of people's thing is they're so impressed by the piece they just sewed or just cut out that their instinct is to grab it and yank it. So if I've cut out a piece with a curve or not even with a curve, it's like our human nature to want to like lay it really flat and iron it and pull on it and make it super smooth. But let's look at what happens and see how much longer this is from just a yank. I was already able to make this 2 inches crooked. So usually this is like a revelation for some people. That is your sewing stuff and ironing stuff. When you're ironing, unless something is finished, you don't want to drag the iron back and forth, because that's just like yanking on it like this. And the other thing is before we start, we wash the cotillo 2 times, and then we iron it really good with steam, and then we kind of leave it alone until the garment is put together, because otherwise you run the risk of all this stuff stretching out and growing and getting super crooked. And that's where like even the most precise sewers, if you have one piece of this and you pulled on something, you're going to have more waves and your bodice isn't going to lay square across the table. And similar to using the cotillo for a tutu. So like this little piece on the bias, once it's cut out, treat it like a delicate thing and don't pull on it, okay? That's my spiel on that, but it's a good spiel. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to look in the grain of the twill, and I'm going to start with my front on the fold. So I need to leave myself enough room for seam allowance. And actually, would you snag me a tracing wheel? Rachel's going to grab me a tracing wheel. I like to mark the waist on here too. So my front is going to be on the fold. So I want my tracing line to be exactly on the edge of my fabric, because that's going to be my stitch line. And I want to know where the waist is, and I want to know where this notch is. If you have a pattern notcher too, you can also use that to mark some of this stuff.
Do you wash the decorative fabric first?
You know, if we think that it's got to get used again, we will. Oh, the question was, somebody asked if we wash the decorative fabric too. Usually we will, and then if somebody, usually we'll wash the decorative fabric, and then if we have, so we're always in this weird spot where we're either making stuff we've designed or stuff other people have designed. If we think they've made a bad fabric choice, we will do everything in our power to guide them to a better fabric choice, especially if something is going to go on stage at a big company where they're going to use it again and again. Even if you say don't wash it, I want a 1/4 inch at the top. Even if you say don't wash it, it's going to get so gnarly, and 3 or 4 girls are going to eventually have to wear it, that the wardrobe crew is going to put it in the washing machine. So, you know, if you don't think it's going to hold up to a wash, maybe try something else. But like beaded laces and stuff, we don't wash because they've got more of an open weave to it. And I don't know if, you know, people notice we're always cutting and chopping stuff up. I'm even going to put the line down the center front. So like when you chop up a lace, if it shrinks, it's like shrinking in little spots rather than a great big piece shrinking. So now I'm going to put my side front on, and I'm putting a fold where I marked my grain line because I want to make that fold match the grain in my cotillo. So I'm going to make that match, and I'm marking in my notch and my waist. So this is my side front. And then it always comes up to, people want to know why we don't always just put seam allowance on absolutely everything. This is a little more accurate. And especially if something has to be adjusted down the line, it's a lot easier to see where it was originally made than to have to kind of guess when stuff is taken apart to make bigger and smaller and shorter and taller. And it's easier to alter a pattern that doesn't have seam allowance. So if I had like 10 girls and one of them is a little bit different than my Basque pattern but close, it's easier for me to just slice it the middle of the pattern and make the change than it is to have to negotiate what's going on with the seam allowance. And then too, you can keep the sewing really accurate by knowing exactly where you're sewing. So I'm going to just continue to trace these out. I'm so excited that Ann Holt Ward sent me a note. Everybody should Google her. She's got an impressive resume. I better send her a letter, huh? A thank you note. A thank you note for your thank you note. You know, cover your bases. So I've got my center front, which is on the fold. My side front, I'm just adding a 1/2 inch to. And now my side back is going to be on the bias. So you have to think of bias like a Chinese finger trap. Like you imagine whatever your garment is, that the bias is doing that on one side of the body and then that on the other side of the body. And the way to make sure you do that is imagine the head of the performer. The head is towards the window here. So I want to make sure that when I flip this, I have the head towards that side of my table and the head towards that side of my table, instead of, in the effort to save fabric, maybe if you flip it like this, then you have bias running the same way from the right to the left, and it doesn't get that sucking action like a Chinese finger trap. So before I do my side back, I want to mark my waist, my notches, and my grain line. So now I'm going to keep the head of my pattern facing the way the head would be on the other pieces. Draw the waist in. So I could totally cut this out and ruin the piece by yanking on it. So I don't want to yank on it. No yanking. We'll cut out the center backs. Rick, in a few minutes, I'm going to give you something to flatline in black thread. So if you want to thread up in black, I'm going to work on the panty while Rick works on our basque here. Now my center back. Oh, I haven't put seam allowance on these. Another thing you can just try with different fabrics that you're washing is just like machine stitch a 10-inch square on it, or just draw it with a Sharpie if you don't mind losing a little bit. Wash it and dry it and really see what happened. Definitely a wash and dry of the cotillion, you can see that it shrunk. And I'm doing 3/4 at the bottom, even though this is a one-timer costume. But now the center back, we're going to add 2 inches to the left of the center back. So I'm going to make sure I'm lining my center back up with the herringbone that's in the twill. So cotillion is a type of twill weave, if I'm confusing anybody. It's Monday. Learn through confusion. So there's my one center back. Oh, I broke my pencil. I like to have notches. Oh, I didn't use my tracing wheel to mark my waist. I've got to peek. I have to peek. There's my waist. There's my notches. So these are my center bags, which we're going to pin and do one, and then we're going to pass it off to Rick. Because I want to get the panty together is my main goal, and then we'll look at all the pieces of this. So 2 inches for over and underlap. And sometimes, you know, if you have like a bodice that the back is an interesting shape, like a big scoop or, you know, a deep point or something, you'll really want to alter it on the side backs or the side seams, because if you start taking in the back of something shaped, the center back, eventually you have like weird crisscrosses and the pattern doesn't lay right. So a way you can like force people to alter it not from the center back is to just put like 3/4 of an inch on your hook side and then put 2 inches on your bar side if you want. Or the other thing that would be even more right is if you've got 2 inches on your center back and haven't put the bodice or the basque hooks on yet, fit it from the center back. Find out like where the 2 pieces meet and pin your new center back rather than just adding bars. Sometimes it's nice to like find out where the actual center back of the human is, then fold under your hook side, then put your center row of bars and put bars on either side of that for adjustability. There's so many ways to do everything, you guys. That's what's so fun. Okay, so now we're going to cut this out. I'm going to cut one piece out. Actually, I wanted to do this different. I've cut a side back out, which we're saying is some of our delicate pieces. So I've cut it right out, which is actually not probably how I would do this if I weren't on camera. So what I need to make sure I do with my side back piece, this has 2 different sides. This is going to be Spanish. I've got a more gold side and a more black side. I'm saying the more black side is the right side for this. And this I've ironed and washed. It was washed for an old project, but I re-ironed it. So now I have to either take a ruler and see if I have a straight grain line, which I don't. I can like look at my edge here and see that it's not straight, but I'm also like in tune enough with this piece of fabric that I can see the weft. So I'm making sure a piece of my straight herringbone is straight with the weft. And I'm going to put a few pins in that. And when we flatline, we sew a long edge, a long edge, a short edge, a short edge, and we run off the piece and we don't backstitch. Because if you flatline, if you start at one corner and go all the way around back to the same corner, you will make a bubble, no matter how great your pinning is. So it's better to do a long edge, a long edge, a short edge, a short edge, to avoid bubbles. And actually now we're so addicted to basting spray in here, you could just slap this with basting spray and lay it down and go for it. If you haven't discovered basting spray yet, it's a life changer. So you'll see too, I'm cutting this out larger to kind of help keep the bias from growing while we're manhandling it. And also, if you've got more fashion, when we get to the serging phase of this, it's easier to make the edge look nice than cutting the edge the same right now. So that's going to be that piece. And then my other pieces, how I would probably approach this personally if this were my project. I'm getting my fabric grain, so right, I'm always working from some weird old chunk of fabric. I'm kind of getting my grain perpendicular to my table edge. We'll pretend I just ironed that again, get the wrinkles out. This is how you guys do this too, isn't it? Pretty much just join it all together here. This is what a lot of us do in this shop, is we'll just like I'm just checking to see if all my pieces are on there. And you're gonna have more success. So right, I'm smoothing this out. My bias piece is still held in there, so I can't make it grow just yet. But I'm gonna get this to fit on there. And it's easier to pin it when it's a great big unit rather than pinning all these small units. And sometimes the little bit of fabric you waste didn't relate to the amount of time you saved. So that's another thing to think about. Like we get a lot of emails from folks saying, oh, you know, I make this kind of costume or that kind of costume, and when I figure out my hours, I'm making 75 cents an hour. And then we just kind of like investigate a little bit to what some of the steps they're doing. And sometimes it, you know, the thing that you think is making it more gourmet or so that you can raise your price is actually just eating up all your time. And there might be a more effective way to do it. So this is how we tend to do this kind of stuff. It's quicker to just get it pinned. So in a minute, I'm going to turn this over to Rick. Actually, Rick, why don't you come and grab this? I'll let you finish pinning it. And just, you know, make sure you have a Rick on hand ready to go, right? It helps. And you can stitch, just cut them out a little bit on the outside and we'll serge off on the seam allowance line, and then stitch in the waists and stitch in the center back. Okay. So Rick's gonna just stitch all this on, he's gonna go off the edges and stitch all this in, and you'll see me in the other recording from the last time doing the same thing but with the 3-piece basque. And he's gonna stitch the center back seams in, and he's gonna stitch the waists in. That way later when you're lining the waist of this up to your bodice, you know absolutely where the waist is, and nobody is going to see that black stitch on this side from stage ever. So you can finish pinning that. And even if you just did a couple and serge them, you could even serge them in pink. Okay. And then we can just show everybody the piece. So I'm going to make the panty now. Yeah, just serge, have like 3 pieces to show them before 2 o'clock. let's scoot the camera over to the serger, and I'm going to get some 3/8" white elastic. Sabina, can you snoop over there and see if there's 3/8" white elastic? Right after I said I'll do it, I was like, no, can you do it? I'm lazy. White. It might be all the way on the right, actually. Is it that tube or is that 1/2 inch? Is that 3/8? Yeah, perfect. Let's make a panty. Let's see. And you, yeah, let me look. It's like making a panty with an angel. That's the fun of live, folks. Let's see. That looks pretty good because I'm going to just be explaining it while I go. If I'm not showing where I'm at, you holler at me, Rachel, all right? So I've got my panty, and I've got my 2 layers, and the first thing I'm going to serge together is my leg openings. And actually, before I do that, this little piece that's pinned in here separately, I'm just going to zigzag it, the internal edges of it, I'm going to just zigzag with the sewing machine real quick. So I think if I turn the sewing machine here, yeah. So that little piece that's inserted in the panty, I'm just going to zigzag around the edges of it right now with kind of a medium-y zigzag. I'm not using woolly thread because I've got a good stretchy stitch. So we're just basting the inside edges of the rectangle that's holding your hook and bar in. And I'm not even back stitching because I'm going to serge over it. This is just holding it in for now. So I can get rid of those 3 pins. And now I'm going to go to my other center back and baste in the internal edges of that rectangle. Inside edges, inside edges. Then we can do a little more at the serger while we're at the serger. Get rid of those. Do I have a, oh boy, these sergers have had some, these are our travel sergers. They've had some rough adventures lately. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to serge is just my leg holes because we're going to flip this inside out or right side out. And you'll see too that I place the pins where they're not in the way of the serger. So I've serged one leg, just the leg holes first. So the first step is serging together your leg holes. So now that I've serged the leg holes, I'm going to flip it so that that initial serging is on the inside. And the little button or the little hook reinforcement that we basted in, he's going to end up on the inside too. So now I'm going to just take my crotch and move that around. So now my serging is on the inside, and we're getting ready to make leg casings. But the next thing I'm going to do, and I'm going to do this without pins, is now I'm going to serge my center back of all my layers together. So I'm serging my center backs. So we're catching that little hook reinforcing piece. I smell popcorn. Do you guys smell popcorn?
It smells like cheap.
Cheap pizza, that could be it too. Yeah, the pizza that has like the little silver mat that you microwave it with. So now my weaker netting wants to end, my weaker mesh wants to end up longer. I'm going to just make them match by stretching it a tiny bit while I serge it together. So I've serged one center back. Now I'm going to go to the other side and serge the other center back. Do, like you do. Okay, so we've got kind of the beginning of our leg elastic casings in, and our backs serged, and our little extra piece of reinforcement added in. The next thing I'm going to do is serge the top edge, and I'm going to pretend I'm at a table, and I'm going to put a couple pins because my weak mesh, my thinner mesh, wants to shift a little bit. So we're going to just try to force him to not shift. We don't want shifty mesh. And then on the same hand, it's stretchy, and you can just make it work. Okay, so now I'm going to join my top edge together with serging. So now we've got the top serged together, the legs started, the leg opening started, and the back serged together. Now we're going to go back to the sewing machine and get the leg openings more done. And we're going to use 3/8 inch elastic in this. I think that often 1/4 is too skinny, but 1/2 is just a little too thick. So the first thing I'm going to do is I've got that serging inside my leg casing, and I don't want my two fabrics to roll back and forth. So the first thing I'm going to do is, with the zigzag, I'm going to kind of overcast my edge of the leg casing. So that's what I'm going to do, is overcast my edge. So I've got my edge, and instead of like just going to town or trying to pin this, I have more luck using the pins connected to my hands, right? I have to say that once a class. And my zigzag, I'm going to do it like a little bit above medium. So instead of like a 3 and a 3, I'm going to do a 4 and a 4. So I'm going to just keep making sure that the edge, that I have a nice edge between my two fabrics. And then we're going to use that to just create a channel to put the leg elastic into. I think my serger needs a little adjusting, but that's all right. So now I'm working my way around the front. And I think I'm going to just completely get one leg opening done, because it'll be the same for the next one. And if you have a cover stitch machine and want to really impress, you can just use a 2-needle cover stitch to lay this edge down. So we serged the leg hole, we flipped the leg hole, so the serging's on the inside. Then we overcast the edge, so we've overcast this edge with a zigzag. I gotta watch which finger I use. I'll use them all. We overcast this edge. Now I'm going to go far enough in that my 3/8 inch elastic will fit, but remember, I've zigzagged over the edge, so I'm not really measuring 3/8 from the outer edge of the leg hole. I'm measuring 3/8 from where the inner part of my zigzag is. So I know on my Bernina, I've got to do just a little bit more over than 3/8 of an inch. It's more, it's like between 1/2 and 5/8 inch, so that I end up with a 3/8 inch hole. And if you're not sure your elastic's going to fit, just have a little piece, sew a test strip, sew a couple inches and make sure your elastic fits, which I probably should do, but I'm going to just go for it. And this is another spot where you could cover stitch if you want. And I stretch this just a little bit as I go, because I don't want the girl yanking it on to be busting my zigzag. So it doesn't hurt to stretch stuff a little bit. Then, as soon as I've done that, I'm going to go back and do it one more time, because if anything pops, it's usually that spot. So I just did one row of stitching and now I'm doing another. I've been around enough tutus to know this is what they bust. So we've got a leg casing in, and now I'm going to put in some of my other stitching. I'm going to stitch in, we have an inch down the center back, so I'm going to zigzag in an inch from both center backs, and then I'm going to zigzag down an inch from the top. So that's what I'm doing next. And I don't know if you saw it, but as I've been putting the leg casings in and these other stitches, I am back stitching. So as I put my inch down from the top, I'm going to go in a little bit and back stitch. And I'm using a zigzag because we're treating this like it's going to stretch a little bit. Yeah. Oh yeah, there's a question. Yeah, yeah.
Would you understitch that leg line before joining all the seams?
Yeah. If you're an understitcher, when I finish this leg edge, you could totally push this, open it up and push the serging to whatever your inside layer is. Do a little zigzag on that. Then when you fold it over, I would skip doing the zigzag over the edge. So if you want, you can understitch the serging. Then you probably don't need the extra zigzag, but it's your call. It's your call. That's a very good question. Then like this top edge of the panty, if I felt like the girl needs a little more girth than the pattern has, you can give her a whole extra inch of girth by making the top edge of your panty only a ½ an inch down. You know, you can change this top placement line. So now I'm going to go up the other center back an inch. I'll trim all my threads later. Then, the next thing that we're going to do, I need a big hook and bar and an awl and a pre-motion foot. We're going to put a hook and bar on this in a minute, but we're also going to stitch across it kind of like a drum. And so when I do this stitch across it, I'm going to lay it out on the table and put a few pins in it. Actually, I'm going to just lay it in my lap. And a piece of that white 1/4 inch twill tape that's on the, or the 3/8 inch, that stuff on those little spools that's cottony, the tailor tape. It might be hiding. Okay, so I'm just putting a few pins to keep stuff. I'm not even like really pinning it where I'm going to sew it, and I have to do this other leg hole, so I'm kind of jumping the gun. But we want to get through the whole panty is our goal. Actually, I'm going to just stitch across the half of the panty where I finished my leg hole. So we're just going to kind of like go across it like the straps on a toy drum to keep your layers from sliding when you are putting your netting on. And you can just do this random, or you can like draw it on with a pencil if you want to. So I'm just holding my layers out. And obviously I don't want to stitch into my leg casing, so I'm stopping before the leg casing. And that line, the line like a toy drum, is kind of marked on the pattern. You can follow it, but you certainly don't have to. This is just to help stuff from getting super crooked when you're, thank you, when you're putting the netting on. And some folks like to stitch in every row. I don't, because we're gonna mark the rows with a pencil anyways, but you certainly can. There's nothing wrong with that. So now we've stitched across, we're working just on half. We've stitched our kind of the line that's basting it all together. And now let's go to the table and mark our layer placements, and then we'll put a hook and bar on this. And look at what Rick did. So we're just working on half the panty. So everything I've done on this half, you're gonna repeat on the other half, obviously. I can trim this up a little bit. So we're gonna be putting 7 rows or 7 row placements on this trunk, but we're gonna probably have 10 to 12 layers of net. And so this top line that's an inch down, that's our seam allowance above that. And then it's up to you to kind of decide how far down on the butt. We don't do crotch ruffles. So my first couple layers of netting, I scoot a little bit lower on the butt. And I also scoot the first couple, you know, not way down into the crotch, but I go a little ways down into the crotch so that I can kind of keep a consistent curve. Then we use a buttonhole spacer, which you can get on Amazon. So if I want 7 sets of lines, my top line is already there because it is the first high hip line we stitched in. And if I want to put that elastic across the body, I've missed that step in this one because we've already stitched this drum line in. But if you want to put that elastic in, you would stitch that casing in. If you want to add this because your skirt's going to get worn a ton, you would stitch this in first, and then you'll have layers of netting above and below it. So that's, you would put that point in, then you have to skip over that casing when you're sewing in these basting lines, okay? Okay. So I'm putting my 7 rows in here, and also 7 rows for 10 to 11 layers of net. I also want to make sure that I don't end up zigzagging my leg casing close. So your bottommost row on here really shouldn't run into the leg casing. You need to stay just a smidge above it. So now I'm spreading my buttonhole spacer out as I get towards my front. And I'm going to put my frontmost in. Then, you know, I haven't done my leg casing and stuff on the other side, but we have more success getting the placement of everything nice by just folding. So we marked half of it. If you just fold your panty in half, and then as you go, just unfold one side, and then just repeat the same markings that you've got. It ends up more balanced and symmetrical rather than trying to use the buttonhole thing to go the whole way across. That's what I like to do. But okay, let's do a couple more things on here. We're gonna put a hook and bar on here now, like 2 or 3 gaps down from the top. So we don't want the hook and bar to go right where the netting is. We want it to go in between some netting. So I'm gonna skip, I'm gonna go 1, 2, 3, like below my 3rd line and put an X. That's gonna be my bar. And then on the same, on the opposite side, I'm gonna go the same amount down, and that's gonna be my hook. So once everything is on here, our panty is going to hook right over left like that. And it's much easier to put this hook on right now than it is way later after you have miles and miles of netting on here. And the other thing that's easier to put on right now is your leg elastic. So I'm gonna just take, my girl's got like a 19-inch thigh. So I'm gonna start with 18 inches and then they're gonna have somebody fit it on their end. So I'm gonna leave it so they can pull it a little tighter if they want to. So I've got 18 inches here. And then I'm gonna take a safety pin and put it on one end and just leave it in there forever until we're all done with the skirt. Then we'll finish pulling the elastic through, because it's much easier to get your elastic in the leg hole right now before the netting goes on than it is to deal with it later. And actually, if there was opportunity for this tutu to be fit more than once, or to have, you know, somebody who really knows what they're doing fit it, we would put a stitch part way, we would kind of find the side seam of the elastic and stitch it into the trunk so that you can pull the front elastic separately from the back. So if I stitched across my leg right here, I can make the back a little bit tighter and the front a little bit looser, kind of like some folks do on a leotard, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. But I'm going to pin my front because I don't want to lose it. Thank you, thank you, thank you. That's great. So let's look at where our basque is, and then we're going to do a couple things on the panty and call it a day. So Rick has flatlined the stitching line. He stitched all the stitching lines in black, and he stitched the waist in black, and then he serged all the way around it. And we've got our center front, our side fronts, side front, then we've got our side backs and our center backs. That's the one I pinned. So this is on its way to becoming a basque. So all we're going to do in the night or this afternoon is put the vertical seams together, and then we'll look at it together tomorrow before we do anything else to this. But I think, Miss Rachel, we're ready to go back to the sewing machines quick and do the last few things on this panty. I like my elastic. It's helping. I had to hang my microphone from the ceiling today because I'm always cutting it, or nearly cutting it. Okay, so a couple things we're going to do here at the sewing machine. We've got our center fronts here in my left hand. Our back is in my right hand. I'm going to fold my front to my back and find the side seam, or the side kind of. And if we want to really keep with what we've been doing, we can move the side a smidge towards the back. So that's my side. And now if I look from my side to my front, the part that we don't want to grow is kind of in the middle of that section. So I'm going to take, you can use just 1/4-inch ribbon or whatever you want, but I just have fine line twill tape, cotton twill tape, which is for tailoring. And I'm going to put an upside down V in that section that we don't want to grow. Actually, I'll sew it in and then show you more carefully where it's at. So I'm imagining kind of where the front of her leg is. I don't want that to grow. And I'm putting this piece of tape above my elastic casing, and I'm sewing it on the side that's getting all the netting, because it'll just be covered up and hidden forever underneath the netting. But you can also, if you want, sandwich it in between the layers. You could sew this on ahead of time and then hide it in between. And I'm going to do a V. I'm going to just kind of go up to the waist and then flip my tape over and go back down to the leg casing. And this is because this is like the tightest part where the most netting is going to get smashed in, and it's the narrowest part of the panty. So it's going to be more apt to grow. So we're putting this piece of twill tape in here because we don't want this part to grow over time. It's a good thing. So I'm just folding my little raw end under to make it look neater. But it's going to get covered with netting, and nobody will see it in a million years. There. So does that show, or is it too much the same color? So you can see I put a little upside down V of twill tape kind of over my front leg. And what's great is that now keeps the panty from stretching up and down in the spot where you're smashing the most fabric in. Her butt's still really stretchy. Her center front is still really stretchy for comfort. But where we don't want this to droop, we've just put twill tape to keep it from growing, kind of like a stay tape. So now this video is putting the hooks and bars on with the machine is somewhere on our Facebook page. If you can't find it, I can help you. And I think there's only like 3 people that I know in today's class that I don't think have done this with us. So I'm going to put my hook on first, where we marked with an X, and I'm going to use an awl to zigzag over. So I've got a really wide zigzag, and I'm going to zigzag over the X where my fold is going to be. Bar tack, sorry, I'm bar tacking. And then I'm going about 1/4 of an inch closer to the center back and doing another bar tack. So I've got width to my zigzag, but I've made my length 0. And I'm going to do a bar tack over the awl, and I'm leaving the awl in for the second bar tack. Why isn't it bar tacking? Oh, I shrank the wrong thing. I want the width. I want width and no length. So there we go. So I'm going to do a bar tack there. Oh, I might have just run out of bobbin. Nope, I'm not. So what I've got here is 2 bar tacks. And you can trim the threads up later, and we'll often fray check the back of our bar tack. But I've done 2 bar tacks over the awl, and then I slide the awl out, and then we're using a big hook, but you can use a small hook, just make smaller bar tacks. Then I slide my big hook in upside down and backwards through those tacks and flip it over. So now I've got my hook in there, and we're going to bar tack the base of the hook now from this direction and this other direction. And I'm shrinking my zigzag a little bit because I don't have to slide anything through now, and I don't want my, I want to anchor it down nice. I don't want it to be sloppy. Is this on that page of handouts? There might be a handout for the hooks and bars with the machine. I'll look. There's an instruction page to it. We can add it to the pattern info page, like written instructions on this. But there's a video where I really explain it. So I'll trim my threads later. So now we've anchored this down really well. And after all the netting is put on and the center back of the panty is stitched up, that's when this is going to get folded over. And we're going to herringbone or cross stitch this remaining edge down. And we can put our bar on right now too. So I'm leaving my zigzag at what it is. And the thing that's hard to see, it won't show on the camera, is there's an opening in the manufacture of the bars. You want that opening to match the opening of the panty so that as it's pulled, it's less likely to work itself out. So the closed edge of my bar is going to where I have more fabric on my garment, no matter what it is. You want the open edge of the bar to be on the open side of the garment piece, whether it's a top or a bottom or pants or whatever. So now, so this I do vertically, and then I also like to sink my needle and twist it and do it from the direction that's getting pulled. So the inside of the panty is where you want more reinforcement. You can do all 3 sides of it too if you want, but these 2 sides are the ones that get the abuse. So I'm going to do that, I'm going to do that. And that's where we're at. Trim all your threads, make it look good. So now we have one half of our panty has all of its stuff going on. We've got our hook and bar at the center back. Later on, we're going to address more finishing on this. And we've got our placement for our layers of netting. And that's about it for today. We can take a couple minutes of questions, and then we'll see everybody tomorrow. I think I can even send out the link for this first part from last time today, if anybody wants to re-watch us teaching the same stuff but at a different time. Any questions? I just look at myself on the computer screen, not at the camera. Any questions? Any questions? Felt like you learned something? You know, Rachel can check everybody's attentiveness, whether you went to a different internet browser or something, if you're shopping on Amazon. She can't see specifically, but we can see if you've left. We're good?
Learned a lot.
Cool. We will do different stuff tomorrow. So tomorrow we're going to start with cutting out netting, and we do it railroad style. We get diamond net from Berenstein's in New York that works the same both directions. So that's something to think about. Like, you know, some people railroad cut unsuccessfully because they're buying like spongy crafty netting. And the direction we're going to cut the net tomorrow makes a tutu that's a little thicker and fuller, which we like to have because we like to control the shape of it when we're tacking rather than ending up with something that's already pretty flat, because in a company it'll be dead really soon. So that's the other reason why we're cutting the direction we do, because we like to have a little more thickness to manage the netting rather than cutting it the other way where it lays down faster. But we'll show you both ways. And we're going to Johnson ruffle some tomorrow. We'll use a ruffling attachment for some tomorrow. We showed one cool thing today on Facebook that we'll show again. We'll show you how to use a fork, how to use zigzagging over a thread or fishing line, and old-fashioned gathering too. And also anybody that has a Bernina that has, I think it's the number 3 foot, the buttonhole foot that has 3 toes, you can also loop a cord over the middle toe of the foot that's the length that you need gathered and just zigzag. And we'll show you that too, which is pretty cool if you have a Bernina. That's it for today. Thank you so much. We'll see you tomorrow. Is it done? It's still recording. It's ending. That's pretty good. I showed him some other stuff. This is actually going to be a tutu for a costume, so that's good. If I want to write that lady back, not from the Wix store, I just...
It should be.
Oh, Tom is on his way. I like this time, 12 to 2, right?